My name is Sarah, and the night my husband tried to introduce his new life in front of everyone we knew was the same night he realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. I spent 3 months planning that retirement party for Daniel. After 27 years of marriage, I thought it was the perfect way to celebrate everything we had built together. I booked a beautiful lakeside event hall, ordered his favorite food, invited all his colleagues and friends, and even arranged a slideshow of memories from the beginning of his career to the present day. Everyone kept telling me how thoughtful I was, how lucky Daniel was to have a wife who supported him for so long, and I smiled politely, even though deep down something had felt off for months. Daniel had started coming home later than usual. He guarded his phone like it held state secrets. Sometimes he would step outside to take calls, lowering his voice as if I couldn't hear him through the kitchen window. When I asked him about it, he laughed it off, saying retirement planning at work had everyone stressed. I wanted to believe him. After all, you don't stay married to someone for nearly 3 decades without trusting them. So I pushed the doubts aside and focused on the party. The night finally arrived, and everything looked perfect. Soft golden lights reflected on the lake outside the hall, and the room buzzed with laughter and congratulations. Daniel stood near the bar, shaking hands with old coworkers, while I moved between tables, making sure everyone had what they needed. People kept pulling me aside to thank me for organizing such a wonderful celebration. "You really outdid yourself, Sarah," one of Daniel's former managers said. "He wouldn't have made it this far without you." I thanked him, though Daniel barely looked in my direction the entire evening. That should have been my first real warning. After dinner, it was time for speeches. I stepped onto the small stage first and spoke about how proud I was of Daniel's career and how hard he had worked all those years. People clapped and smiled, and I could see Daniel watching me from across the room with a strange expression I couldn't quite read. Then he took the microphone. At first, his speech sounded normal. He thanked his coworkers, his mentors, and even me for supporting him along the way. But then his tone changed. He said retirement wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of a completely new life. The room grew quiet as he smiled toward the entrance of the hall. I remember turning my head slightly, confused about what he meant. And that's when the doors opened and a young woman walked inside wearing a red dress, looking far too comfortable in a room full of my husband's friends and family. Daniel's smile widened as he reached out his hand toward her and said words I will never forget. "Everyone," he announced proudly, "I want you to meet the woman who will be part of my new life from now on." In that moment, I felt every pair of eyes in the room slowly turn towards me. But what Daniel didn't realize was that the story he thought he was starting that night was about to end very differently than he imagined. I froze for a moment, staring at Daniel and the woman he had just introduced as his new life, feeling a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief all at once. I could hear the murmurs around the room, whispers of confusion and surprise, but I refused to let them see the storm brewing inside me. My hands tightened around the champagne glass I hadn't even touched, and I reminded myself to stay calm, to think before I acted. For years, I had supported him, silently built our home, handled every detail of our finances, and now this, the audacity of him thinking he could just replace me in front of everyone without consequence. It was breathtaking. I forced a polite smile, clapping along with the rest of the guests, but inside I was calculating, planning. As Daniel went on about how he and his new partner were going to travel, start new ventures, and finally live without constraints, I realized something important. He had no idea how much of our life was actually under my control. While he had assumed that the house, the cars, the investments, and even his retirement funds were his alone, I had quietly ensured that everything was legally in my name, protected for the very day he might make a move like this.
My mind raced as I watched the woman next to him smile, completely unaware that her newfound status was temporary, that her presence was a fragile illusion in a house that wasn't hers to claim. The crowd began asking questions, trying to be polite, asking about the new woman, how long she had been in his life, and I could see Daniel starting to sweat, fumbling for answers. That's when I decided it was time to make my move. I stepped up to the microphone, my voice steady despite the whirlwind inside me. "Thank you everyone for coming tonight," I began, making sure my tone was warm and calm. "It's been an incredible journey watching Daniel grow and succeed, and I'm proud of everything we've built together." I let a pause stretch just long enough for the room to settle into quiet attention. "But there's something important everyone should know," I continued, watching Daniel's smile falter for the first time that evening. "Daniel may have planned a new life, but he doesn't realize that the house he lives in, the business he runs, and the retirement savings he believes are his alone actually belong to me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The young woman's smile disappeared instantly as she glanced between me and Daniel, confusion and fear flashing across her face. Daniel's expression shifted from smugness to shock and then disbelief. "What?" he stammered. "Everything you've assumed was yours, Daniel," I said, my voice calm but firm, "was always under my name. The house, the business, the retirement funds, I've protected them in case the day ever came when someone thought they could take more than they earned. And tonight, that day has come." I could feel the room turning tense, all eyes on him. Colleagues who had once praised him for his career achievements were now staring, murmuring quietly to each other, and the young woman's face was pale as she realized she had been led into a trap she didn't understand. Daniel opened his mouth, trying to defend himself, but the weight of the truth, the reality of the life I had built quietly while supporting him openly, was crushing. For the first time, he looked small, powerless, and completely unprepared for the consequences of his choices. And in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Not for him, not for the woman he thought would replace me, and certainly not for me, the one who had always quietly been in control.
The room was silent, the kind of silence that stretches long enough for every heartbeat to echo, and I could see the disbelief written all over Daniel's face as he tried to process what I had just revealed. The young woman next to him clutched his arm, realizing for the first time that she had walked into someone else's life, someone else's power, and that everything she assumed she could claim was never hers to begin with. I looked around at the crowd, many of whom I had known for years, and I could see their eyes shift between curiosity, shock, and admiration, silently acknowledging the truth I had quietly protected all along. "I've always supported you, Daniel," I said, my voice calm, but filled with the authority of someone who had earned her place. "Through the good and the bad, building a life and a future we could both share. But while you were busy thinking you controlled everything, I made sure that nothing, absolutely nothing, could be taken from me unfairly." I paused to let the weight of my words sink in, noticing Daniel's hands tremble slightly and the young woman's confident demeanor faltering. "Tonight was meant to celebrate your retirement, your achievements," I continued, "and I wanted everyone here to honor your hard work. But some truths can't wait for tomorrow." I gestured toward the contracts and documents I had prepared in advance, neatly laid out on a table near the stage. "The house, the business, and all the retirement accounts you assumed were yours are legally mine. I took care of it quietly over the years, knowing one day your choices might lead to this moment." The murmurs turned into whispers, some guests even rising to get a closer look at the documents, while others exchanged glances, recognizing that this was not just a confrontation, but a masterful revelation of foresight and planning. Daniel's face turned pale, and he opened his mouth as if to argue, but the words wouldn't come. He realized in that instant that every decision he had made, every assumption about power and control, had been based on false security. The young woman's eyes widened, finally understanding that her role in this life had been temporary, fragile, and entirely dependent on someone who had quietly been in control all along.
I smiled softly, not out of cruelty, but out of the satisfaction that comes with quiet justice finally being revealed. I hope this teaches everyone here a lesson, I said, turning slightly toward the audience, that respect, trust, and foresight are never wasted, and that sometimes the person you think is powerless has been quietly preparing for their moment all along. The room was tense, but I could feel the shift in energy, the subtle acknowledgement that the truth had been served in the most undeniable way. Daniel finally stepped back, defeated, realizing that the life he had tried to start was not his to claim, and the young woman followed, her earlier confidence replaced with nervous humility. I took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline and tension slowly ease as I looked around at the people who had been witnesses to this night, understanding that the story they would leave with was not one of humiliation, but of someone finally standing up for herself with dignity, intelligence, and quiet strength. That night, I learned something important. Power isn't always loud, it isn't always visible, but it is always there when you prepare for it, protect it, and wait for the right moment to reveal it. And I had done all of that, perfectly. My husband's new life had been introduced, yes, but it was the life he thought he controlled, and in reality, it was mine from the start.